Thanks for coming. My name is Chad Aldis, a Vice President for Ohio Policy at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. I really appreciate you all taking the time to be here this morning. Fordham, as most of you probably know, is a policy advocate, and we have a host of priorities. But we also try to evaluate, when implemented, if those policies actually improve educational outcomes for students. That's why I'm extremely excited about the presentation of this new research that we are unveiling this morning. Today, we'll hear about the first examination of whether the bold and innovative initiative to provide additional dollars to charter schools based on their educational success is having an impact. The research was conducted by Dr. Stéphane Lavertu, a professor at Ohio State University. I'm not going to do a long intro or make a lot of comments today because we have a really good presentation today, including a special guest around 9:30. After Dr. Lavertu's presentation, we'll have a panel discussion with educators whose schools have received the additional dollars to hear directly from them about the impact that that money is having. So without further ado, Dr. Lavertu, the floor is yours.
I'm going to try to speak in the microphone. Please point it out if I don't. So thank you, Chad, for the introduction. Thanks for coming. I'm excited to present the results of this study to you. I just have a few slides. I don't have very many, and I have three goals. One is I want to make sure that we're on the same page about what this program is all about and what it does. Two, I want you to get a sense for how I did this study and why you should believe what I'm telling you. I see a lot of stuff in the media, even reputable newspapers, that purport to provide estimates of programs' effects, and a lot of it is not true. It's not believable. It's not credible. So I want you to have a sense for how credible this study is, and then I want to give you a bird's eye view of what the results are. But it'll be quick so that we can get to conversation and the nitty-gritty. I don't like standing back here. First, in terms of what the program actually does, as Chad mentioned a moment ago, the program was passed in 2019. It was an initiative of Governor DeWine and Lieutenant Governor Husted. They put it in their very first budget. General Assembly passed it that summer. And the point of the program was to put extra money in the hands of effective, high-quality charter schools. It refers to community schools if you're not familiar, because in Ohio that's what we call charter schools, but I'm going to call them charter schools for the purposes of this presentation. And the condition for getting this extra money was one, that the majority of your students have to be economically disadvantaged, at least 50% of them. The other condition is that the charter school needs to be high quality. And there's two ways that we determine high quality according to the program. One, the charter school's average test scores essentially need to be higher than those of district schools nearby in the same geographic school district. So that's one. The second dimension of quality is that the students in that charter school need to learn more from year to year, right? So between third and fourth grade or fourth and fifth grade, their students need to learn more from year to year compared to the average Ohio student. And it has to be a statistically significant learning growth compared to the average Ohio student. So provided that those two conditions are met, schools get, at least until this past year, got $1,750 per economically disadvantaged student, and they got $1,000 for, or up to $1,000 for all other students. Between 2020 and 2023, that's the timeline of this analysis, that's about a 10% increase in funding, which in education circles is a large increase, meaningful increase in funding. So the analysis. The focus of the analysis is 21-22 and 22-23 school years. The reasons for that is that in the spring of 2020, we had the pandemic, we didn't have any testing, so we didn't have test scores then. And then if we wanted to calculate student achievement growth from 2020 to 2021, we couldn't do that either. So for 2020 and 2021, we couldn't observe this outcome that we cared a lot about. And there was also a lot of noise going on, a lot of things, money coming in and out, students experiencing hardships at home. And so we focused on the latest 2 years and what the impact was then. So for those latest 2 years, the average amount of money that schools participating in the program got, those high-quality charter schools got, was about $1,500 per student, and 43% of eligible brick-and-mortar, site-based charter schools got those funds. And when I say eligible, I mean these are all schools that serve a general student population or special education. We're not talking about dropout recovery here. So in terms of estimating the causal impacts, again, I don't want this to be correlational. We need to believe that the program actually led to these outcomes, that these outcomes would not have been realized in the absence of the program. And there are methodologies that we can use to do this under certain circumstances, if certain assumptions are met. One of those methodologies is called regression discontinuity design. The federal government touts it as providing quality evidence. Economists tout it as providing quality evidence. That's what I used for this study. And what we do in it is very intuitive, in fact. What you do is you identify those schools that just barely met the requirements for the extra money. And you compare them to the schools that just barely failed to meet the requirements for that extra money. And the idea is that if you get close enough to that cutoff of what determines a high-quality charter that gets money and one that's not, those schools are nearly identical. The only thing that's different between them, when you get really close to that cutoff, is that one happened to get more money and the other didn't. So that's what we're trying to do here. And there's ways to check to see that that actually worked. So I did a number of validity checks, but for instance, what you want to do is make sure that indeed, before the program was implemented, schools on either side of that performance threshold were essentially identical in terms of spending, the students they educated, the number of students in their school, anything you can imagine. They were indistinguishable statistically, except for the fact that some of them went on to get extra money and some of them didn't. I also did a whole bunch of other things that I list there that you can see if you read the report. There's sensitivity analyses, there's a long appendix. Anyone can check anything that I did and can replicate anything that I did to make sure that it's right and that it's tight. Okay, so let's go on to the results. So what does the study do? Remember, I'm comparing those that barely met the requirement to those that narrowly failed to meet the requirements. And I'm using that to estimate the impact of getting that extra money on schools' spending. How do they allocate that spending? Staffing, who are they hiring? How does that change their workforce? Student outcomes in terms of test scores, and student outcomes in terms of absenteeism, which is something that we all care quite a bit about these days. So this first figure focuses on spending per pupil. And we have on the left this bar above classroom expenditures. That bar is telling us how much more in classroom expenditures schools that got the extra money spent. So if you got extra money, did you spend more in the classroom? This result says yes. And it's solid red because it's statistically significant. So they spent more on average by a magnitude of $1,346 per pupil for this estimate. There's lots of estimate in the analysis in the report that you have, but this is the midpoint about the average estimate that we get for this. So we know that classroom spending increased almost by the amount of money, extra money, that these schools received on average. For any given school, maybe they did something slightly different, but the average school that got this extra money, that's what they did. The next bar is for non-classroom expenditures. There's a negative estimate, but the bar is empty. That means we shouldn't really believe that estimate. That means that estimate can't be trusted, it could just be statistical noise. The bar is empty because it's not statistically significant. So we can't tell if there was a slight increase or a slight decrease in non-classroom spending. It could be exactly zero, which would make sense. What we can conclude from this figure, though, is that when schools got extra money, it went to the classroom, it didn't go to non-classroom. Do we save questions for later, or do you want to?
Go ahead.
What's your definition of classroom spending?
It is the state, good question. It's the state of Ohio's definition of classroom spending, available on their website, so there are business rules for doing this, but there's two components that are easy, discernible, and then the rest is not as discernible. There's direct instructional spending, where you've got a teacher or an aide that's directly instructing a pupil, so part of this is instructional spending. The vast majority of classroom spending is instructional spending. Whatever's left over, I'm not quite sure what they spend it on, but it's something that goes directly towards students in the classroom. When we talk about staffing in a moment, you'll see that we can directly observe what the bulk of that went towards. It's a good question. Thank you. So this table actually presents similar comparisons to the previous one, but I had to put a bunch of them together, so let me walk through it. We're focusing on staffing. That first column of numbers is the estimated impact that I plotted in the previous figure. So if it's positive, that means there was more spending in the school that got money under the program. If it's negative, not more spending, but that means that quantity increased for those that got extra money. If it's negative, that means that quantity decreased for schools that participated in the program, got the extra money. The second column with numbers is the average value of that particular staffing variable. And that's for context, to get a sense for how big these effects are. If the number is red, that means statistically significant. And that's what the star means as well. So we'll just focus on the statistically significant estimates. Students per teacher. What that's telling us is schools that got extra money, on average, ended up with nearly 4 fewer students per teacher after getting that extra money than schools that didn't get that extra money. So how could that be? Well, it appears that they actually had slightly more teachers in those schools. There wasn't a decline in the number of students or anything like that. So on average, we have nearly 15 students per teacher in the average charter school. So reducing that by about 4 students per teacher is a lot, right? That's a big effect. The next line is really telling. And I wish I could have shown you all the other analyses I did with this particular variable. But this variable captures the number of teachers in a charter school who are new to that school in a given year. On average, in a charter school, almost 43%, you can see that in that second column, almost 43% of teachers are in their first year, in any given year. In other words, you have a lot of churn in charter schools. Teachers are coming in and out. A lot of new teachers that you've got to train. This says that schools that got extra money reduce that turnover significantly. The number there is 12.5, basically percentage points fewer first year teachers as a percentage. And that's like, I don't know, a third, 25% reduction in teacher turnover. Salary. Again, we've got a range of estimates, a lot of which are a bit bigger than this, but the average teacher salary was over $8,000 higher in schools that got the extra money compared to those that didn't. So you can sort of tie these together. You increase teacher salaries, you get less teacher turnover. This is test score growth. Number, you've probably heard this if you've been to other presentations, that we're trying to characterize how much more students are learning based on how many days of additional instruction it would take, on average, to get those higher test scores. Focusing on the lower bound estimates, we'll just be super conservative here so that we're not overinflating things in case that the statistical noise is carrying some of the results. We're saying here that getting extra money is the equivalent of students getting between 12 to 14 extra days of learning, of instruction, every year, every single year. That's how much higher their test scores were. It's as if they had 2 to 3 weeks more of school. The average estimates, the main estimates, are actually quite a bit bigger than that, right? Over 40 days worth of extra learning in a given school year. We can also do this with proficiency level. Here is a performance index, in case you're familiar with the performance index. You could even just think about this as proficiency rate, percent of students who are proficient. These things all roughly align. One of them isn't statistically significant, the other one is, but the estimate is always between 4 and 5 percentage points. So if you have a school where 50% of students are proficient, getting extra money makes it so that about 54 to 55% of students become proficient. And here's absences. In this case, negative is good. And that's what we're seeing. Schools that got extra funds, their absence rates declined by 2 percentage points. And so relative to schools that didn't get extra funds. So if the average attendance rate was 86% in a charter school, which it was during this period, not so great, you get extra money and that attendance goes up to about 88%. Chronic absenteeism is the one that really hits me hard. Remind you, chronic absenteeism is when a student misses 10% or more of instructional hours in a school year. That's the equivalent of missing like 18 days of school or more. A lot of them are missing a lot more than that. On average, in charter schools, because they educate low-income, primarily low-income urban students, their rates of chronic absenteeism are over 50%. Over 50% of their students are missing over 18 days of school a year, or the equivalent of that. This says that if you give charter schools this extra money, those schools that got the extra money, their rates of chronic absenteeism go down between 5 and 7 percentage points. Right? Instead of 52%, we're talking about 45%. That's a pretty big change. Just take home points here, last slide. So in 22 and in 23, increased classroom spending, increase in teacher salaries, reduction in teacher turnover, increase in test scores, reduction in absenteeism, and the effects are large. We were dealing with school level data. We weren't able to get the 24 data. They're not all out yet even in time to get some more data to look at the expansion. So some of the extremely large effects could be statistical noise, but we can actually rule out that there is no effect. In fact, we can rule out that there are small effects. We know that there are some substantial effects on all of these dimensions because the design is fairly credible. And we will look at those 2024 data as soon as they're available. Thank you.
So before our panel discussion, we have a couple minutes. If there are a couple technical questions for Professor Lavertu. Otherwise, then we'll move to the panel after that. Did Representative Byrd, did you?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. I'm looking at your take-home points. It says increased classroom spending. Is that also to say that there was no additional spending on central office kind of administration? Was there any growth there at all?
I can't rule any of that sort of stuff out. So if I look at the salary increases and try to figure out if that captures the majority of classroom spending, I can say yes. But it certainly doesn't capture all of the extra spending. Where I'm unable to detect where some of those other funds might be going. And it might just be highly variable across schools.
Follow up on that. One of the other points talks about increased test scores. What tests are we talking about? What tests did you give for that?
So we didn't give any tests. The data are all publicly available, which is why people can replicate my study if they read the appendix. They're all Ohio State tests. And so we have grades 3 through 8, or if we're looking at value-added, grades 4 through 8, and then end-of-course exams in high school.
Mark?
So if you're comparing the school year to year, are you able to isolate like the movement of students? So for example, like chronic absentee going down, do we know that the same students' level of chronic absenteeism went down, or did the school's level go down?
That's an excellent question, and one of the reasons why doing the next analysis, hopefully with student level data, is a wonderful idea. So that was a primary concern when doing this. We don't want these results to be due to students moving around. So you get more money into a school, and then suddenly you're able to attract higher achieving students, and it's not because you're any more effective, it's just because you have different students. And so we wanted to make sure that that's not a major issue. And I did a number of things to do that. One is I examined to see if before and after the extra funding there are changes in the composition of schools in terms of the percent economically disadvantaged, percent with disabilities, percent English learners, the number of students. I couldn't detect any changes in composition. Still doesn't rule it out though. So the main achievement outcome is value added. Value added takes account of all of that. Because the value added estimates line up perfectly with the performance index and with the chronic absenteeism, I'm feeling comfortable in saying that this is probably the effect of the program. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Professor. Why don't we go ahead and then move to our panel discussion. So panelists, if you please join me. much. And now moving to our panel presentation, let me introduce our panelists, which we're very excited to have, because at the end of the day, research is research, but schools are where kids are educated. And these are some of our best charter schools in the state of Ohio, and so we're so excited to have them here today. From the end of the table, working this way, we've got Charlie Bohl, the Deputy Superintendent at Dayton Early College Academy. Got Tony Gatto, Executive Director at the Arts and College Preparatory Academy, and Ciji Pittman at KIPP Columbus. So thank you all for taking time away and coming here to join us today to tell a little bit about your story and the difference these dollars have made for you. And that's exactly where I'm going to start this question, the questioning. How did you, we've heard the statistics about raising teacher salaries and teacher retention, all of those, but how did your schools use these additional dollars? Mostly on staffing and compensation, or did you also boost other initiatives? And what differences have you seen in your classrooms with these additional funds? And I'll let whoever wants to start kick us off.
I guess it's me. Our school's at DECA, we're down in Dayton, and it lined up really well with what we saw in the research report. The main area of spending for us was on teacher salaries. A couple of years ago, we were able to make a pretty significant increase, and the value proposition behind that was teacher retention, making sure that, especially as salaries in the county started to raise in the public school districts, we wanted to make sure that our school was a place that teachers saw as a longer term option for them to stay at, so we weren't seeing high churn. And happy to report that the change there has been positive. Our teacher retention rate is over 80%, which in the charter world is really, really high. And since it's between 75 and 82% at each of our campuses since we increased those teacher salaries. So that would be our primary area. Outside of teacher salaries, one-time costs of adoption of high-quality instructional materials in the classrooms. So that's curriculum materials, research-backed curriculum materials that we adopted. And those are, again, one-time costs. Those aren't massive ongoing costs. And then the last area that for us made a big difference, a big dent in chronic absenteeism in particular, was transportation. So we actually, which is not classroom spending, but it's what gets the kids in the classroom when they get to school. We're having a lot of issues with transportation, especially coming out of the pandemic school year. I think schools were having a hard time, the local public school district was having a hard time staffing bus drivers, and so we ended up bringing transportation in-house. That's not a cost that long-term we would love to have on our books, but it has certainly made a difference for us in chronic absenteeism. Our chronic absenteeism rate is below the state average, and far below the state average for charter.
So thank you, Charlie. Before Ciji and Tony jump in, if those of you in the audience would like to hear a conversation on transportation, we are contemplating that for either November or December, because it's certainly been in the news a lot lately, and I think it's an area we should probably explore a little bit.
May we ask questions or?
Yeah, let me give each of them a chance to see how they use the dollars, Dan, and then we'll jump to you. So Tony and Ciji.
Very similarly, we also made significant investments in ensuring that we had the salaries to both attract top teachers across our community and then retain them. We wanted to ensure that if teachers were looking at KIPP Columbus as a long-term option, that they wouldn't have to make potentially sacrifice where they love working at KIPP Columbus for just resources for their family. The other thing that we've done, which has had an impact on our chronic absenteeism, is around transportation. So we brought that in-house last year. Again, that is not something that we're hoping to do long-term, but it was something that has had a significant impact on our attendance.
And then also similar spending at Arts and College Prep Academy, or ACPA. I developed salary structures for the first time in the midst of these years that we're talking about. And so like general estimates, if we're looking at Columbus City School first year teacher salary, we were about 10 to 15,000 lower for our first year teachers. And where I've been able to close that gap to about 8,000 lower, which is still a significant difference. But in that structure, we've been able to kind of, the teachers that have been around for maybe 10 years, they're getting a more equitable salary to what they would be seeing at the district, still lower. But it lines up with the data. It's attracting teachers that have more experience, more than it is the first year teachers who are still going to be looking at lower salaries. Although sometimes it is the first year teachers that we want to be attracting because we do different things with our instructional models. And so if you have teachers that are kind of ingrained in a certain way of instructing, and we're asking them to do something that's more like project-based learning or arts integration, that can be a hard switch. So looking at that, also in the art zone, we expanded right in 2019. So right before the pandemic, we built a building that had an auditorium that was basically a shell. So we've spent a lot of these funds on making that a fully functional space for kids to perform and to learn in. So it's also, it fits in the instructional zone and the facility zone, but it like lights and soundboards and a full-fledged auditorium, but we're also, it's a teaching space so they learn how to use those things.
Dan, did you have a question?
Well, actually, I have an editorial and a question. Editorial was kudos to Fordham and Professor Lavertu. Very interesting studies. Thanks for doing this. Question is, can you flesh out transportation? We're in Cincinnati, and everything is fine in Cincinnati. We have no problem whatsoever. Well, and then I woke up. So I'm curious, what did you do? How did you bring it in-house?
We contract a service, so we contracted with our vendors First Student, and working directly with them, and honestly there's quite a level of customer service. They're really incentivized as a private vendor to provide really strong customer service to us and to be responsive to the needs of the school in a way that maybe like a local public school district is not quite as incentivized to provide really high quality service to a charter school.
What's your cost per child? How do you run the contract?
It's a daily cost per bus. They don't actually up to a certain number of students can ride any bus, but it's a daily cost per bus, and it's extremely expensive. I mean, it costs around $600,000 for us to bus the students a year.
Wow.
And for us, it's about $2 million, $1.7 million.
Oh.
We wanted to ensure that we weren't experiencing some of the similar challenges that the larger districts were, and so we actually have 2 contracted vendors that we work with.
But I'll add that in the absence of it, we were spending not $600,000, but we were spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars a week paying staff members to wait with kids until 6 o'clock for buses. And that doesn't do good things for students and families. It does certainly agitates parents. It agitates school administrators and teachers as well, who you're paying to stay there after school.
And we're still in that zone, and that's where some of this money is going, because I think at Columbus we're kind of tapped out with the vendors that we can pull in, and we're reliant on transportation from the district, and it's also contributing to the chronic absentee numbers that you're looking at, because the kids are just not getting to school, and that does not excuse them from being absent. So we are definitely using this fund and what was just said about paying people to stay after school and other transportation solutions.
We're probably losing, I'm on the board of 2 intercity Catholic schools in Cincinnati. We're probably losing at least 40 kids a year, just losing them because they can't get the transportation to get there. So there's another way of thinking of that.
So I am enjoying this line of questioning around transportation. When I mentioned it, from the nodding heads in the audience, I think you can count on seeing a Fordham event before the end of the year where we can break down and examine transportation a little more fully. As you all probably saw, we've been joined this morning by Lieutenant Governor John Houston. Welcome, Lieutenant Governor. Thanks for joining us. And now I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and adjust our normal and deviate from our regular event schedule. It is my distinct honor this morning to present a special award to the Lieutenant Governor. In a variety of elected positions, Speaker of the House, State Senator, and now Lieutenant Governor, John Husted has championed charter schools. He's done this for more than 2 decades, and Ohio families have benefited. In so doing, he's been an unwavering voice for empowering families with high-quality public school options. The most recent example, during the last state budget, the DeWine Husted administration showed tremendous leadership by championing a $3,000 per pupil funding stream for low-income students attending high-quality public charter schools. This is both historic and innovative. And let me put a fine point on that. No state in the country invests in this manner based explicitly on academic achievement. And given what we've already heard today, the program appears to be having a very positive impact for our students. In recognition for his leadership in Ohio, the preeminent national charter school organization, the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, has named Lieutenant Governor Husted one of their 2024 Public Charter School Champions. And it's my pleasure this morning, on behalf of NAPCS, to present that award. Lieutenant Governor, please come forward and receive your award and offer your
Thank you. Great, thank you. We'll sit this back in here. Thank you very much. That honor means a lot to me. It really does, because the idea of charter schools and school choice is why I, in part, ran for office from the very beginning. I was working in economic development in Dayton, and we were struggling in Dayton because the Dayton Public Schools were 613th out of 613 public school districts for student performance. And we were trying to change the public school system to better serve these students. We elected new board members, we did this, we did that, nothing would change. And so we went with the idea that the only way we were going to provide a quality education for the students in our community was school choice, whether that be charter schools, vouchers, or the like. And I said, well, I'm going to run for office, and I will go to Columbus, and I will sponsor legislation to provide every child in this state, particularly those who are trapped in chronically failing schools, access to a school of their choice. And I remember saying to myself, who could be against that? Oh, how great it is to be young and naive. And I got to Columbus, and I sponsored, my very first bill was a charter school bill, working with Fordham Foundation. And I found out there were a lot of people who were against, particularly low-income children having access to a school of their choice. But we fought and we fought, and we passed the first freestanding piece of charter school choice legislation in the state of Ohio. And we've learned a lot since then, and we continue to learn how to improve the way that we offer these educational alternatives to children. And we're talking about transportation. Should we be surprised that a public school system that's not very good at providing academic support to students wouldn't be very good at providing transportation support for students? We know that these are constantly challenges that we must undertake in changes in state law and the way that we execute policy in the state to continue to improve the environment for education, because you know this. Outside of the family that you grow up in, the most important issue in determining your future is the education, the schools that you attend. And we, in America, owe it to our every generation to give them the best possible opportunity to get an education that will help them live their version of the American dream. And it is an honor for me to serve and to be able to fight for these children. I thank you for what you all do in this same fight on behalf of these young, the children of our state and of our nation. Somebody's got to fight for them. You're doing it. I'm doing it. And there's no better reward than when you meet some of the young people that otherwise would have been trapped in a chronically failing school, who find their way into a charter school or in some cases a voucher school, and they get a great education, and they go off and either go get a job or go to college and then get a job and break a cycle of poverty, showing the way for the kids in their neighborhood, for the people in their family, and creating a line of hope back to the neighborhoods, families, and communities that they come from, to show that anybody in this nation can still rise from wherever they started to do whatever they want. But what you do is essential. School choice is an essential element of that. And so this is a worthy cause, a worthy fight, and it is never won. We can win some battles, but you never win the war, because there's always somebody coming to take away the ground that we've captured on behalf of these kids. And so continue to do the work that you do, and know that you have a friend and ally in me. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Lieutenant Governor, and congratulations on the award. It's very well deserved. All right, now you're stuck with me. So in addition to basic fairness to charter school students, another goal of providing more equitable funding has been to help quality charters build the capacity they need to serve more kids. How is your school or network thinking about expansion? Is the quality funding program sufficient, or are there other pieces that need to be in place for significant expansion to occur?
So as I said, we had just expanded in 2019. We were a high school and we added grades 7 and 8, and it was through a Ohio Construction Facilities grant, and then the Charter School Program grant also funded this expansion. And then last year we purchased a piece of land that is adjacent to our school for future expansion, and we're still deciding what to do with that, but one of the options is a career tech program in the arts that I think we're looking at, kind of post-pandemic instruction, post-pandemic education, and the need for skills-based learning and the development of careers as opposed to a straight shot to college. And that we're looking at, we need a facility to do that. And so the Ohio Construction Facilities Grant, I don't know if it's available right now. I heard that there is some federal expansion money, facility money being talked about, which is great. But access to those facility dollars have always been limited, and we have to build a reserve fund to supplement a lot of that. And we do that, and so this fund also contributes to building that reserve fund. But like I said, when we built the building that we're currently in, we've already outgrown it, 1, and then 2, it wasn't really finished to the degree because we didn't have enough money to outfit it in the way that we wanted to for the programs that I'm talking about. So, I mean, as always, more funding is going to help with that, but I don't think it should be tied to performance. If we're the whole fund, the whole charter movement, if we're looking at you've got to get to this one point then to receive more funding, it does kind of seem more of a reward than it does supporting kids and supporting the programs, and that if we have the equitable funding, we could all get there quicker.
Great. Charlie or Ciji, anything to add on that one?
I would just say that I think when you're on the shoestring budget without the high quality dollars, you really can't. It's hard to think about expansion, right? Because you're kind of just thinking about how to make do with what you have. And so I think like when we are able to increase the quality in our schools and the quality of the output that our schools have, it actually it creates an appetite. It actually drives the appetite for more high quality seats in Dayton in our case. But the barrier then for us has consistently been facilities. Facilities has been the hardest piece for us to figure out. And we are at capacity. We're really over capacity when it comes to our middle grades in particular. We're over censused quite a bit in our schools. So ideally, yes, we would like to expand and offer more seats. Currently, the main barrier to that is facilities, but it's absolutely part of our strategic discussion now at a organizational level and at a board level because we have been able to qualify and requalify for the high quality dollars, which I think is not only continuing to drive up the reputation and the appetite in the community for more high quality seats, but also on a more local and organizational level creates, I think, more of a desire for us to continue to grow. So that's where we're at.
All right, Tony opened the door to a point I want to cover. I'll ask this last question and then turn it over to you, but don't worry, I have more questions if you don't have any. And so that is a relatively modest share of charter schools receive these additional quality funding dollars. Do you think this study or your experience builds a case for more funding for all charter schools? Should policymakers think about charter funding equity in a broader way? And if they pursue more comprehensive funding equity, how do you think they can maintain a focus on quality and student achievement?
Yes.
The dangers of a six-part question.
Absolutely. But also, we're seeing the data that test scores are increasing as a result of the funding. Then logically, if we're going to increase funding in schools that are lower performing, then we're going to see increases in performance there too. And so it's like I said, it's like we got to get to the point where you receive the funding, and so it's almost like a carrot out there, and it is. It's like $sign carrot, and we need it. But the schools that haven't achieved that are still in the cycle of not being able to attract quality teachers and not being able to purchase a quality curriculum. And so it is necessary everywhere, yes.
Yes, I think to that point, I think we know that the number one factor in whether or not a student is going to be successful is the teacher in front of that classroom. And to that end, we have to have the ability to provide them with salaries that are going to be competitive and make them want to come and stay at charter schools. And again, that has a tremendous impact on the achievement. I also think it's important for us to have an eye attuned to quality. And so I think, you need the funding in order to attract the great talent. And I think that to some degree, I think transparency with families around here is what this school is providing so that they can make those types of choices, I think is one way that quality can continue to flourish.
I don't have a ton to add, other than I think, yes, getting closer to funding equity is really important for charter schools in general. I also believe that I believe in the importance of having an incentive for quality and for performance. And I think that that's something that has been really powerful about this program in particular. And then, a word on teacher salaries, because I think we keep talking about that. Like, when we're talking about increasing teacher salaries, we're not talking about teachers all of a sudden becoming, you know, a lush, high-paying profession. We're talking about getting close to the amount of money that a teacher would make in a similar position in the local public school district. So when we're looking at teacher salaries, we're looking at like the county as a whole, and trying to figure out how do we get to the middle in terms of pay equity for our teachers. We're not trying to get to the top because we can't. We can't. But we also know that the teachers that we're hiring, oftentimes, to Ciji's point, they want to be there. They want to be there, and we don't want the reason that someone leaves to be because we're not paying what is like a fair salary or fair wage for our educators. So I think in terms of like funding equity, yeah, we gotta get it so that charter schools can attract and retain high quality teachers. But I'll also say I do think it's a powerful incentive to it keeps you on your toes, right? It keeps you on your toes, and it keeps your foot on the gas as a school to continually try to drive improvement.
Great, thank you very much. So a little context for the audience. I know you heard several panelists talk about the need for more money and more dollars. And I think the context I provide is before these programs and some of the funding improvements for charter schools that we started in around 2019, charters often, on average, got between 70 and 72 cents on the dollar. So when people are saying more money, it's not like they were fully funded and they're just asking for more. So if they were at 100%, I think it's a different analysis as to whether more dollars would help or not. And we haven't done that today. What we've talked about is schools that are facing big funding gaps that are receiving additional resources and what that impact has been. So I just wanted to put that out there. All right, now any questions? Mark?
I have two, one for the panelists and one for the professor. For the panelists, you talked about the change in salary. Did you also change the overall comp for teachers, specifically like retirement, if you're not part of the state teacher system, as an incentive as well, or is it just their salary that was increased?
So we have to be a part of that teacher retirement program, so we are a part of that.
Same. We did change how we did compensation overall, like simple things like recognizing master's degrees and like HSA contributions and stuff in our health insurance plan. So that plays into it as well. But by and large, we're talking about salary increases.
And it is not an option in Ohio to not be part of the retirement system for a charter school, but maybe it should be.
Well, it's an option for traditional public schools. You can opt out and enter like a 401k and not have to be a part of the state retirement system.
Well, there are three options within the state teachers retirement system,
Yeah.
but it's still part of STRS.
Sure.
That's yeah.
For the professor, you mentioned 48% of schools. Do you know what percent of students that represents, both charter students in brick and mortar, and then also overall students in the whole charter sector on that?
You're asking for the percentage of students among charter school students and the percentage of students among all students who are in schools that got extra money?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to tell you that. I wouldn't be able to tell you that.
Sure.
But I suspect that because of the way that the design works, the percentage of schools is probably almost exactly the percentage of students in the charter sector. So it should probably be around 43% as of 2023. And again, we need to be careful about how we define the charter sector. I've defined it here as schools that are brick and mortar, general education, special education. You got to cleave off all of the dropout prevention recovery. They wouldn't count. So maybe we're talking like a quarter. I don't know.
Yeah, and one of the reasons the dropout recovery schools had to be removed from this is they're not currently eligible for the funding.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't be part of the analysis. Other questions from the audience? All right, you're giving me extra time, I appreciate it. Does the timing of these payments, it comes in January of fiscal years, impact how you use the funds? And also, as you're thinking about budgeting these dollars, the fact that they're not necessarily guaranteed beyond 3 years, How does that impact how you're thinking about how and whether to use the funds?
It can be a little scary. Once you're used to it, and we're in a position where we've had it for all of the years, and then actually saw lower test scores last year, and until your report card comes out, you don't know that you're going to be a recipient of it. And so you include it in the budget, and you're almost rolling the dice at some points. And then coming in January, I think we're just now seeing just different budget to actual numbers than we're used to seeing throughout the year, especially in the fall, because that money is in the budget, and without it, we're going to be beneath the budget, or the budget actual is not in the place where you want it to be. So, we are definitely in a zone where we're dependent on it now. And I think if we look at what happened post-pandemic and with ESSER money, and I know that was another question, but I'll rope it into this because it's kind of the same thing. We had to create multiple positions with that ESSER money, and those positions were not in a place where those can go away. The effects of the pandemic still exist in schools with kids, and we're going to continue to see things that we haven't really realized how to address yet, and with technology. And so a lot of they're like social positions, counselors, social workers, increase in administrative services. Those are also being funded by this currently and taking the place of some of that ESSER money. And so it's really vital.
I think we are incredibly fiscally conservative in our budgeting. And so I would say the funding not being permanently written into legislation is something that we talked a lot about when we tried to consider, do we invest in salaries? Because you certainly can't invest in salaries and then have, if the funding from the state goes away, changing the salaries that teachers are expecting and used to. But ultimately, we decided that investing in the teacher salaries, attracting top quality talent, would ultimately have the biggest impact on our students. And so that is a leap of faith that we took, knowing that we had to continue to advocate for these dollars and for them to be in permanent funding.
All right. One last question, and then I'll get you out of here on time, which if you've been to these events before, you know is unusual. So when the Quality Funding Initiative passed, some critics, and I think the Lieutenant Governor sort of alluded to this, it's always a battle politically, suggested that charters were prone to misspending money. Does it surprise you this study found that charters by and large appeared to use a lot of the extra funding in the classroom and to increase teacher salaries? And what would you say to those critics who are often portraying this as a zero-sum game?
It does not surprise me that the study found that the money is spent largely in instructional and classroom dollars. In order to qualify for the money, the ethos of the organization has to be about serving students. Otherwise, you're not going to get the results that will drive actually qualifying for the high quality dollars. So it doesn't surprise me at all. And you're further incentivized to requalify. So you want to reinvest that money into the classroom. So no, it doesn't surprise me at all. I would invite critics to come and visit DECA and look around. You're not going to see a lot of Rolls Royces in the parking lot or anything like that, right? Like these are, it's the way that the money is spent. I think aligns with the organizational values, and I don't think that schools that are incentivized in some way other than for student achievement and for like bettering, offering school choice options for kids in the community, I don't think that those schools would qualify. I've often said, I think like one of the biggest enemies of a high quality charter school is like a low quality or poorly operated charter school, right? The ones that have ended up in the news over time. And I credit in a lot of ways I credit our sponsors. I credit the Fordham for bringing a level of accountability to that. I just don't think you could get away with spending the dollars when you have like a really high quality sponsor and authorizer. I don't think you could get away with spending the dollars on things that are superfluous or unnecessary to the operation of the school.
All right, with that, thank you all for coming out this morning. It was a pleasure to have you. Be on the lookout for an event on transportation. You all nodded, so you're now like legally bound to attend. Please take some refreshments, donuts, things with you, because I don't need to eat leftovers. So anyway, have a great day and thanks for coming out this morning.